Essential Self-Care Podcast, a podcast for those of us who are, let's face it, too busy for self-care. In this podcast, you will hear real life stories from people who leaned into their self-care as they were navigating life's storms. You'll learn practical tips, tools, and strategies to incorporate self-care into your own busy life as well. You'll hear from expert guests sharing their expertise on specific tools and modalities of self-care to optimize your well-being in your life, career, and relationships. I'm your host, Dr. Sheetal Ajmani. I am a physician, best-selling author, and founder of Radiant Living Institute, where I guide high-achieving women to get unstuck and learn to live radiantly again through major life transitions. Quick disclaimer before we dive into the episode, please know that this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always seek the advice of your own health practitioner or mental health provider for your specific situation. Now, let's get started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Essential Self-Care Podcast. I am really excited about today's episode. I was chatting with our guest just before we started the recording, and I was saying that she has been on my radar for the past a little over a year to invite to this show. So I am so thrilled to have her here with us today. Today's guest is Dr. Melissa Sundermann. Dr. Sundermann is a double board-certified physician in internal medicine and lifestyle medicine, and also has training in integrative medicine and mind-body medicine. She is the chair of the Nature as Medicine Subcommittee for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and also the co-founder of Revive Lifestyle Medicine Wellbeing Coaching Program. She currently practices medicine with Lifespan Medicine, a concierge functional medicine practice that takes a holistic and integrative approach to healthcare. Known as Dr. Outdoors, she can often be found practicing what she preaches through spending time outdoors, running, biking, hiking, skiing, and creating adventures with her family. And we actually had the opportunity to collaborate. We were both speakers at a lifestyle medicine conference last year in 2023, hosted by SoMeDocs, or Doctors on Social Media, which is also great. Just a shout out to SoMeDocs. They're doing amazing work, really featuring health topics brought to you and presented by physicians themselves. So that's actually how we initially connected, and I tuned into her presentation there, and I was like, I really want to have you on my show. So I've been following Dr. Sundermann along on social media, and like I said, I'm so excited to have her here today. And today, Dr. Sundermann is really going to share from her expertise a bit about the science behind nature's healing power and its use as a self-care modality. Welcome to the show, Dr. Sundermann.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Absolutely. So I'm so excited to dive right in. So as you may or may not know, the topic I spoke on at the Lifestyle Medicine Conference was on Ayurveda. So I am, in addition to being a physician, also a certified Ayurveda lifestyle consultant, and a big piece, actually one of the core pieces of Ayurveda relates to our connection with nature. And that there is just so many benefits on physical, mental, emotional, spiritual levels of connecting with nature. And I have also taken a look at some of the science, again, just from my own interests as well, around this, but really you have taken a deep dive into it. And so I am just so excited to learn from you as well and share this episode with our listeners. So can you tell us a little bit about, let's just dive right in there. Like, what is some of the science that and I know that there's a lot, and there's a lot of different aspects that we could go into, with different conditions and things like that. But what would be some kind of nuggets from some of the science and research that you would like to share with our listeners today?
Absolutely. And I want to, start with saying, as you know, nature as medicine goes way back. In fact, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, one of his quotes is, "The physician treats, but nature heals." Right? So that was centuries ago that knowledge, that nugget was there. And fortunately, we now have the research, and it's emerging, it's exploding to really support that, because I think, back in ancient cultures, the connection to nature, biophilia, just our innate connection with nature was there. And with modern technology and modern conveniences, we have gotten away from that connection with nature. In fact, the EPA did a study several years ago asking Americans, how much time do you spend outdoors? The average American spends about 87% of their time inside buildings, homes, workplaces, schools, stores, and about 6% inside automobiles or public transportation. So the average American is only spending at the most about 7% of their day outdoors. And we know from E.O. Wilson and his prolific writing about biophilia, and that is just the innate connection to all living things. And what we forget sometimes is that we as humans, we are nature. And I think growing up, we all knew this. Now I'm in my mid 50s. I grew up in the 70s. There was no rules back then, right? So I spent my time outdoors as a kid digging for worms and climbing trees and building tree forts and catching fireflies and trying to look for butterflies. And we knew this as kids, right? And we wanted to be connected with all creatures around us and picking dandelions. And then as we get older, we stray away from that. And so the research really, when I dug into it, really starts in the 1980s in Japan. And one of the principal investigators, who is still prolific doing research and writing, is Dr. King Lee. And this is his original work on Shinrin-yoku, which means forest bathing. Shinrin-yoku, practicing of just being in nature. And that doesn't mean you need to be climbing Mount Everest. That is just being present in nature. And it started off in about 1982. And the original project was funded, interestingly enough, to hopefully reduce stress in its workforce. So this is way back when. Nowadays, we have chief wellness officers, chief well-being officers in 2024. But back in the early 80s, they had the vision and insight to know that this is really important. So Dr. King Lee was particularly interested in forest environments and whether that could reduce stress. And as we know, stress can impact our immune system. I remember being in medical school or in college and being in finals week and pulling all-nighters, or maybe being a resident and staying up all night on call. And you do that repeatedly, and then all of a sudden you get sick. And you're like, darn it, I have the weekend off and now I am sick. And that's because stress inhibits our immune function. So he decided to, in about when was this? Yeah, 2005, did one of the first forest bathing studies. And what they did was they took individuals out to the forest for 2 days. They checked natural killer cell activity intricately involved in our immune system, and they measured it at baseline before they went to the forest. And then they measured natural killer cells of level of day 1 and day 2. And what they found was a statistically significant increase in natural killer cell activity day 1 and day 2 of being in the forest. So then they said, well, maybe that's just because people left their homes. They didn't have to do the chores. They didn't have to sit down and do homework with their kids. Maybe that's the reason why it went up. So they took that same group of subjects, and instead of going to the forest, they took them to an urban environment. So a city with lots of concrete and sharp, angles and sounds. And they did the same thing. They measured natural killer cell activity at baseline, day 1, day 2. They did not find an increase in natural killer cell. So there seems to be something in the forest environment that is boosting natural killer cell activity. We now know that probably one of the components of that and mechanisms of that is something called phytoncides. So phyto, P-H-Y-T-O, means plant. And we talk about that in lifestyle medicine, phytonutrients, fruits and vegetables, eat the rainbow, we get phytonutrients. Well, phytoncides, phyto meaning plant, cidal meaning antibacterial. Any green living plant, tree, shrub produces phytoncides. They are organic volatile compounds, and they emit these compounds to protect themselves from getting sick. When we are around anything green spaces as we like to call it, we inhale those phytoncides and it boosts our natural killer cell activity. Dr. King Lee actually did a really very small but really interesting study. It was only 12 subjects. They each had their own hotel room. 6 of the subjects, they had rigged the rooms to emit essential oils from the hinoki cypress trees. So basically emitting phytoncides into these rooms. The other 6 rooms were emitting to nothing. So just blowing out air. And so they spent the night, 3 nights in the hotel room. They came out and they had checked natural killer cell activity at baseline before they went to the hotel rooms. And then after 3 nights, the 12 subjects came out of their hotel rooms and they measured natural killer cell activity. Subjects that were sleeping, inhaling those phytoncides had a 20% increase in their natural killer cell activity, whereas the control group did not. So those were some of the original studies with natural killer cell activity. Then they went on a couple of years later to do a larger study where they had 12 forests all over Japan, and they had groups of 12 people, and they would take, it was a crossover. So 6 of the subjects would go into a forest environment, 6 would go to an urban environment, and they would sit for 15 minutes and then they would gently walk for 15 minutes. Instead of measuring natural killer cell activity, this time they measured cortisol, which is a stress hormone, heart rate, and blood pressure. Optimally, we want those all to be on the low side. We need cortisol in our body. We don't want to have no cortisol. That would put you in the intensive care unit. However, chronic inflammation we see with continued elevated cortisol levels. So what they found was consistently with cortisol levels, heart rate, and blood pressure, just being in that forest environment compared to the urban environment, they saw lower cortisol levels, lower heart rate, lower blood pressure. So getting out of that sympathetic, we think of fight or flight, into that parasympathetic, that relaxation state. We are getting emerging more and more data out there, but those are some of the fundamental original studies that have been out there for a long time.
This is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And there's so much I want to reflect on here with that. So I'm going to I've been taking notes as you've been chatting. And so I'm just going to kind of go through some of the things I jotted down to reflect on a little bit. One is going back to, like you said, thousands and thousands of years ago, or not even that long ago, hundreds of years ago, even 50 years ago, nature, like spending time outdoors, spending time in nature was just so much more part of our daily life than it is now. I was just completely astounded. Not necessarily surprised, but definitely taken aback by the statistics, like just seeing those numbers that you shared with us and writing those down, that we spend 87% of our time like indoors, like in buildings and things like that, 6% of our time in automobiles or transportation vehicles, only 7% of our day outdoors. That is just incredible. Whereas, it used to be that you would spend more of your time outside. And something else that made me think of, just when you were describing like childhood, right? Like, and just as children, often it's just so innate to like connect with nature, to be outdoors, connect with the plants and animals and even the insects, right? Like catching lightning bugs and just the fascination of it all, right? Or chasing butterflies or, things like that. And I think as adults, something that, not only obviously do we get, busy, right, with our just daily responsibilities and things like that. But one thing that I think happens also is we lose this sense of play, that like it's okay to just play, because we just feel like we have to constantly be doing, right? And I see this a lot in clients that I work with, that they feel a tremendous amount of guilt to even take a break, or, not to mention do something that would be considered as like play for no other reason than to just, enjoy. But, and that's where I think that, first of all, I don't think we need a reason to play. I think it's important. I think it's something that our human nature desires, and needs, and is certainly a part of life. But I also do think that, for my listeners who do have that strong sense of guilt, and again, this is many people that I work with. So if this is you, like, know that you're not alone. Like, anyone listening, like, know that you're not alone. This is something I see quite often. But sometimes, looking at the science, looking at some of this research can just be like that added evidence, added motivation to be like, okay, this is more than play. Like, yes, it is completely valid just to go out and play. Quote unquote, I'm using the word quote unquote play, but spend time outdoors, and just be in that sense. But then also knowing that it is actually beneficial to your overall health and well-being. Quick shout out to today's sponsor, Reclaim Your Radiance, Radiant Living Institute's signature coaching program designed to help you reclaim your worth, renew your energy, and restore your happiness in your life, career, and relationships. This 6-module curriculum has already helped countless women rediscover themselves through life's storms. From setting difficult boundaries within toxic relationships to finding their inner strength and power while navigating divorce and co-parenting, to aligning their career and business with their authentic self, and to learning how to live for themselves again after their kids have left the nest. This program has been a guiding force for women to live unapologetically and shine brightly within their lives once again, or often, even for the first time ever. Experience the results for yourself. Head over to radiantlivinginstitute.com/reclaim your radiance to learn more and get started. And then something else, let's see, a couple other things that I wanted to comment on. Okay, so I had heard about this term forest bathing, right? It's something that I've heard about quite a bit. I haven't dived deep into it. Like I've seen books about forest bathing, websites about forest bathing, right? And so I really like that you broke it down that it's really just being present in nature, because I think sometimes we can have an impression like, okay, is this something that I need to do more guided or something more complicated than it is? But I really like how you broke it down to like just being present in nature. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting, well, I thought so much of what you shared was interesting, but one of the other things that stuck out to me is that the studies that you cited, it really wasn't that much time in nature that they saw a difference in these, markers of immune function, in these, markers of inflammation and stress response, right? It was literally like a few days.
Well,
And
and
so just,
actually, I mean, thanks for bringing that up because when we
yeah.
look at the research, and there was a study that came out of the University of Michigan, go blue, that's where I'm from, that was looking exactly at that. What is the nature dose? Because as Dr. Outdoors, I would love it if I lived in a tent in nature, but I have a job, I have a family. So the way that they looked at that nature dose, at least originally, was looking at the largest percent cortisol drop decrease beyond diurnal effect. As we know, cortisol levels ebb and flow throughout the course of the day. So what they found was the sweet spot was about 20 minutes where you saw the largest decrease in diurnal cortisol variation. So when you look across the research and data, it's really pretty consistent that so the nature dose that I prescribe is aiming to get 20 minutes per day or 120 minutes per week outdoors. Now that can be broken up just when we prescribe exercise, right? We say, hey, we want you to try to get 30 minutes of moderate intensity, but you can break that up into bite-sized, chunks. So the same thing with nature. There's lots of research coming out about early morning sunlight exposure. And no, that doesn't mean you have to be out by 5 a.m., but if you got outside by about, 9 or 10 a.m. without wearing sunglasses, because you want those infrared rays from the sun, and there should be a safe time where you don't have to really worry about sunburn as if you were, because the sun is not super high in the sky. But getting outdoors in the morning for maybe 10 minutes and then do your another 10 minutes at lunch or after dinner, we know that early morning sunlight can help boost serotonin levels, which is our happy hormone. It also helps to regulate our circadian clock, and that is so important. We were born to basically be up when the sun is up and settle down when the sun is down. So that helps to regulate that circadian clock. It also helps to regulate cortisol regulation and also with melatonin. And so I always, recommend to my patients, it'd be great, like if you go for a walk in the morning, but maybe you just want to sit outside and journal or have a cup of tea. It's really important to try to get that early morning sunlight exposure.
I love that. I love that. And I love how you shared, because that was going to be a follow-up question that I was going to ask you for our listeners. But I love that you went ahead and shared it. So the 20 minutes a day of spending time outdoors has been shown to help reduce cortisol levels. And then you just listed, goodness, so many benefits of early morning sunlight exposure as well. But really knowing that those 20 minutes a day outdoors can also be split up, right? So it can be done in chunks. It can be 5 minutes 4 times a day. It can be 10 minutes twice a day, right? So whatever you can kind of fit in there. One of my big things and approaches when I'm working with clients is that small changes can make a really large impact. And so I love that you shared that. I think that all of the nuggets that you've shared today are just really help to make this quite a bit more accessible to folks. I hope to our listeners here today. And I hope also with this conversation that we're having, Dr. Sundermann, quite a few of my listeners do work in the healthcare field and quite a few don't. And so I really think that this conversation really brought something to both of those communities. As healthcare professionals, I hope that this kind of triggered some insights and some curiosity for some of our colleagues who may have not explored nature as medicine or nature as a therapeutic process to recommend to their patients. So I hope that this spurred some curiosity for them and also gave them some insights into some of the research so that we can start having more of these conversations with our patients in the clinic and in the office as well, and for individuals, healthcare providers or not, because really the fact is we all need this. I hope that this conversation gave you some insights as well into, yes, some of the science, some reasons, both scientific as well as practical, just accessible and increasing that accessibility to spending time outdoors in whatever way, shape, or form feels good for you as well. So, Dr. Sundermann, there is so much more we could talk about, I know, because even some of the things that you just mentioned here about like the circadian rhythm research and the early morning daylight, like we could do a whole episode just specifically on those topics, and perhaps we will in the future, because I would definitely love to continue these conversations with you. But for now and for time's sake, would you be able to share with our listeners where they can learn more about you and the wonderful work that you're doing?
Absolutely. So I'm going to give one more quote that I absolutely love. And this is Dr. Outdoors quote: "There's no bad weather, just inappropriate clothing." So I live in Michigan. That means we have a season called winter that lasts forever. And so people will say, I don't know, the weather is not right. So really, I'm like, yeah, if it's air quality is bad, it's really, really hot and you're at risk of heat stroke, or if you're going to get frostbite, be safe. But otherwise, get the right clothing and the right attitude and still get outdoors.
So I love that. See, I think I've seen that on your because I follow Dr. Sundermann on Instagram and LinkedIn, and she'll share those where you can find her, and I'll also have those in the show notes. But I think I saw that on one of your posts at some point.
Absolutely.
And you guys definitely follow Dr. Sundermann. She is always posting. It's so inspiring. She's always posting. Like I said, she definitely practices what she preaches and spends a lot of time outdoors, and just a lot of fun and interesting posts that she has of her doing lots of things outdoors. And it's just really inspiring. And if you need a little reminder to get outside, definitely follow along on her pages. So, but I did interrupt you. So if you could share where we go.
On Instagram, I actually have two handles. I made it more difficult for myself, but I'm on Instagram at Motivator Melissa, as well as at the Dr. Outdoors. And then I do a lot of content on there, and then I do a lot of content on LinkedIn, and that's where I'll share a lot of the research that's going on. So it's just Melissa Sundermann on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. The concierge practice that I'm involved with, we really focus on longevity, lifestyle medicine, integrative medicine, and functional medicine is Lifespan Medicine, and website is just www.lifespanmedicine.com. So, and then I'm really active with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. So if you want to learn more about lifestyle medicine, go to lifestylemedicine.org, and we'd love to have you join the lifestyle medicine movement. So those are the basic ways to find me. I'm at motivatormelissa@gmail.com if you want to shoot me an email. And thank you so much for having me today and allowing me to share my passion for nature as medicine.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. I will include all of those links in the show notes. And I was actually thinking and looking for it just before we started recording, a link to the conference that we both spoke at last year, because that is available for people to access. So I will track that link down as well to include in the show notes if anyone wants to tune into that. Thank you again so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Essential Self-Care Podcast. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe, leave a positive review, and share this episode with someone you know. And remember, your free guide, 6 simple yet powerful steps to create your radiant life, is waiting for you at radiantlivinginstitute.com. Download it today.